Be honest. When was the last time you woke up actually feeling rested? If your answer is, I can't remember, you're not alone. We've mistaken exhaustion for productivity and wear it like a badge of honor. I used to think I could just power through until I nearly crashed my car with my children in the backseat. That moment woke me up to how vital sleep really is. Poor sleep isn't just making you tired, it's wrecking your hormones, your focus, your mood, even how hungry you feel. But here's the truth. It's likely not about sleeping more, it's about how you can sleep better. I'm Dr. Kristen Holmes, and in today's episode of Science and Soul, I'll show you how to find your natural sleep rhythm so you can wake up energized, sharp, and in control of your health. Because knowing when and how to sleep might just change or save your life. I believe that making positive changes in your life can sometimes start with even the smallest steps. By making the choice to subscribe to this channel, it's a step in the right direction. When I see those subscriber numbers go up, it makes me so happy because it shows that you are making a commitment to learn to live with more joy and more energy. Your support is truly appreciated. Thank you. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Today's episode is a subject very near and dear to my heart: sleep. And I know a lot of folks probably roll their eyes or get anxious, or lots of emotions come up around sleep because a lot of folks actually don't sleep very well. A lot of folks don't feel rested and restored and alert during the day, and struggle with this thing that we are supposed to be spending about a third of our lives doing. And so my goal for today's episode is to give you kind of a high-level overview of what is this thing called sleep, why does it matter, and I think most importantly, how to back into a really restorative night's sleep. I'll do my best to talk about some of the differences between men and women, and kind of work through the various stages of our lives and how our sleep kind of changes and how to kind of stay ahead of some of these changes that are inevitable. The main change is just aging. Our sleep changes as we age, and the more informed we can be about what's to come, the better we can prepare ourselves to mitigate some of the harsh transitions that happen over the course of our lifetime. I think that they're, with really clear strategies and understanding, we can really be in a position to have healthy sleep over the course of our entire lives. And I will say that there isn't perfect consensus on exactly what is healthy sleep. And this is an area that I spend a lot of time doing research in, really trying to come up with a working definition of healthy sleep, which is a relatively ambitious goal. And there's a lot of us, working on trying to define this, but I think we do have a pretty good understanding of how behaviors during the day impact our ability to get restorative night's sleep, how behaviors in the lead up to bed specifically will impact our restorative night's sleep, how environmental conditions during sleep can impact our sleep architecture and the quality of our sleep. So these are things that I'm going to discuss. I thought I'd share, to start, just a personal story. Sleep is very personal for a lot of reasons, and has become a big piece of my life's work. And, there was a time when I think, like many of you, like I just did not prioritize sleep at all. I just thought that I just didn't even know that it really mattered. And it wasn't until a really scary moment in my life happened that kind of woke me up, literally and figuratively, to this thing we call sleep. And I was in a time in my life where I was a Division I head coach. I was really busy, and I was, to say that I was burning the candle at both ends would be an absolute understatement. I really didn't prioritize my health, and this was about a decade and a half ago, and I had just given birth to my daughter, my second child. My kids are about 18 months apart, so I had roughly an 18-month-old and a newborn, and my grandmother had just entered hospice. So, she was at the very end of her life, and I was living in New Jersey at the time. She was in Massachusetts, and I was the executor of her will. I was really the primary kind of caretaker for her. So I began traveling, back and forth to tend to a lot of the details that come with having a loved one in hospice, at the end of their life. And I was, nursing my daughter and doing all the things that you do, as a new mom. During this time I was, still coaching and, doing all the things in my professional life to kind of keep the balls in the air. And I got really, really exhausted, as you can probably imagine, mentally, physically, emotionally. And, it was a time too where I didn't really know how to ask for help. I was, just kind of felt like asking for help generally was just a sign of weakness and a sign that I couldn't handle it. And so I was kind of doing, a lot of this alone. My partner at the time was we owned a business, and it was very seasonal. So the summer was like the key month, and this was the month of July. And so he was really busy kind of tending to the business. So, I was kind of left to my own devices. And um, I had just visited my grandma, and was heading back to the hotel. I had both my kids in the car, and I fell asleep at the wheel. And hit the grass, and, it was really bumpy, and, it woke me up. And, fortunately, I was able to get the car under control, before, colliding into, a bunch of trees. But, that really was the moment when I decided things needed to change. And, I think we all have these moments in our life where, we recognize that the path that we're going down isn't sustainable. And this was the moment for me. I realized not only did I put myself in danger, but most importantly, I put my children in danger. And that was the moment, I really committed to figuring out, what I needed to change about my health in order to keep myself and my children safe, at a really fundamental level. I put them in danger. Obviously that moment had a profound impact, and I started looking at sleep more closely. And I came across a bunch of work by Dr. Russell Foster. He's a researcher out of Oxford University, and Dr. Samuel Hattar. I started learning about sleep and circadian rhythms, and realized really quickly that sleep is not an indulgence. It's not a luxury. Um, it is an absolute necessity for human health and functioning. And I started getting pretty obsessed with it. And as I mentioned at the time, I was a coach of student athletes, and I was at a really competitive university where, sleep just wasn't prioritized. In fact, the local coffee shop had a T-shirt that proudly stated "Sleep is for the weak." And of course, it's like in jest and in kind of this funny play on words, but I think that really was the sentiment at this university, that sleep was indeed for the weak, and everyone was so hard charging, burning the candle at both ends. And I kind of went against that, and started being really, really vocal about this thing we call sleep. And the more I learned, the more I saw that, wow, this is so vital. And holy cow, this can be an enormous competitive advantage if we learn how to leverage it. So, with my student athletes, we really started to figure out how to prioritize sleep in this really hard charging competitive environment. We set up plans, we figured out how to, reorganize our environment. And really, I would say that being able to leverage sleep was was one of the reasons why my teams were so successful. Is we knew that every time we stepped on the field, we likely had this edge over our opponent, because we were thinking so intentionally about what is so foundational for human performance and human health and functioning. And I think as a result as well, my team got injured less. We were sick less
As a result, we were literally just available to train and compete more often. So by the end of the season, when a lot of teams are kind of burnt out, they were getting injured, they were getting sick, my team was really healthy and kind of firing on all cylinders. Let's talk a little bit about sleep cycles. So I'm just going to talk through, again, very high level. You've got, the sleep cycles as described in sleep science, and you've got the sleep cycles as described on your traditional tracker. So if you're wearing a tracker, you'll see sleep stages are generally used loosely bucketed into awake, light, REM, and slow wave sleep. So 4 buckets. The REM and slow wave sleep are considered the deeper stages of sleep. Light is considered the lighter stages of sleep. So generally, kind of when you're transitioning from REM to slow wave sleep. And then awake usually means that you're not in detectable physiological sleep. You might not be able to perceive that you're actually awake, but indeed you're not meeting the criteria of physiological sleep. Now, in sleep science, they'll describe kind of our sleep cycles as kind of non-REM and REM sleep. So 3 non-eye movement stages and 1 rapid eye movement stage. And these make up 1 sleep cycle. And these sleep cycles are about 90 minutes, and you will cycle through these stages about every 90 minutes. Now, it's still up for debate in terms of like, what does this perfect architecture of sleep really look like? But generally speaking, you will kind of cycle through these stages in a relatively consistent manner. Now, the things that can disrupt how you cycle through these stages are things like a big meal close to bedtime, okay, might end up fragmenting or changing that architecture. A really hot sleeping environment might change the architecture. Lots of blue rich light very close to when you fall asleep might end up fragmenting or changing the architecture of that sleep. Unmanaged stress throughout the day that kind of accumulates and bubbles up when you try to initiate sleep, or you're so damn tired you fall asleep, it might end up fragmenting that architecture. Other things that impact a sleeping environment where there's lots of ambient light. So let's say you have a night light or you have street light that's flooding into your bedroom, which again, all of this can be easily remedied by wearing an eye mask, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that light, at night can definitely kind of wake you up and fragment what would be kind of that healthy sleep architecture. And the other really big piece that we don't always think about is actually when we wake up in the morning, whether or not we're viewing lots of natural and artificial light, because that's really what sets our circadian rhythm, allows us to initiate sleep at a predictable time, and then really does actually help us fall asleep. And indeed, the more light during the day that we experience, generally speaking, the more restful, the more potential we have for a restful sleep at night. So those are some of the behaviors that can influence these sleep stages and the sleep architecture. The other thing that deeply influences your sleep architecture, and we see this in the data at Whoop, is the degree to which you move and exercise throughout the day. The more you move, the more you exercise, and indeed, the fitter you are, the more predictable your sleep architecture, the more it kind of matches what we think is a healthy sleep architecture. So movement during the day is really fundamental for getting a good night's sleep at night. So why does sleep matter? So sleep, when you think about your ability to just at a very simple level be alert during the day and be able to engage in activities with focus and concentration, and be able to remember whatever it is that you might have learned yesterday and carry that into the new day. Sleep, a quality night's sleep, is going to help facilitate that. And during sleep, REM in particular, is when we consolidate a lot of the learning and memory and where we regulate our emotions and deal with some hard emotions from the previous day. That's when all of that is happening, is during REM sleep. Okay, so when we're not getting REM, which is usually the bulk of our REM is at the back end of our sleep. So if we're getting short sleep, we're cutting down on our REM, which means we're cutting down on the potential for that, alertness and in carrying over the learning and the memory. So for example, if I have a test today and I cut my sleep short because I think I want to prepare for my test, well, that's really a counterproductive strategy because I need that REM in order to remember what it is that I need to bring forward when I'm sitting down to take my exam. So that's one of the core reasons for prioritizing sleep, is just literally to be engaged with your life in a way that feels really productive. Okay, the other piece that we know is that when you're getting short, inconsistent, low quality sleep, your risk of conditions like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and neurodegenerative disease all increase. Okay, so your risk of those diseases is going to increase when you are getting very irregular sleep. So that is the timing of when you go to bed is highly variable. Okay, we call this sleep regularity or sleep consistency. Okay, which is a really important behavior that we need to figure out. And I'm gonna talk very specifically on how to figure out what your optimal time for sleep is. So you can be in a position to go to bed and wake up at similar times, because this is one of the really big drivers that we're seeing emerge in recent studies that point to sleep regularity being even more so than duration. Although duration matters, sleep regularity is even more predictive of all-cause mortality. So something we want to pay attention to. The other piece that is so important is the relationship between sleep and mental health. Okay, sleep and mental health are very tightly correlated. In fact, my team published a paper in May of 2023. We looked at U.S. Army soldiers in Alaska. We looked at 1,000 of them, and this is a really high-risk population. They suffer from a lot of mental health issues. These many times are younger soldiers who are very far from home. They're in a very kind of harsh climate, Alaska, with really long winters and really long summers, which all kind of causes, some pretty profound sleep disturbances. And we definitely saw this in the data. But one of the things that was very clear in the data is that the soldiers who had more regular sleep-wake times, we saw a strong correlation between regular sleep times and positive psychological functioning in the soldiers. They had better social networks, more positive social networks. They had more positive workplace resilience. We saw a decrease in homesickness, a decrease in loneliness, and stronger feelings of purpose. So that's just one study. There are many other studies really that support kind of this idea that there's a strong relationship between sleep and mental health, and specifically sleep regularity. And I kind of keep coming back to that because the research really is emerging that that's kind of the canary in the coal mine as it relates to sleep. So we want to try to get that right if we can. The other, I think, piece that's worth mentioning is that when we have really unstable sleep-wake time, we're not getting, restorative sleep, so we're not getting into these deeper stages of sleep consistently. Maybe we have really short sleep. It is going to wreak havoc on our hormones. If you are young and adolescent and, you're not getting the sleep that you need, the chances of your hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, being out of whack increase. Okay, so this might show up as an irregular period, for example. It may show up at, as delayed um, onset of puberty. It might mean that you're not able to build strength. It might mean you're not growing at the rate that you should be. So sleep is so vital for development, for brain development, okay? In addition to all the things that I just mentioned. So we want to try to build healthy sleep habits as, from childhood, and maintain those healthy sleep habits throughout our lifetime. And again, to mitigate all of these risk factors that I'm talking about, but it will just allow you to, regulate your hormones, which is going to allow you to just be a more stable human being while you're awake. And I think the other piece, just as it relates to hormones specifically, and two hormones in particular, ghrelin and leptin. These are your hunger hormones. Ghrelin is the hormone that makes you feel hungry, and leptin is the hormone that helps you feel satiated. Okay, so I'm full. And when we don't get the sleep that we need, ghrelin dominates. Okay. And that's why when you have short sleep, you are likely going to crave fattier foods, more sugary foods, right? And in fact, some research has shown that folks who have short sleep will eat up to about 300 to 400 more calories, which is wild, right? And if you add that up over the course of the year, that is a lot of pounds. So sleep is not just a, about managing all these risk factors, but it also very much on a tactical daily level is going to influence how much food you eat. So that becomes, I think a really important kind of source of insight as it relates to sleep and hormones. Um, in terms of estrogen, so estrogen on a mechanistic level affects body temperature regulation. So when you are getting short or regular sleep, you are going to have lower levels of estrogen. Lower levels of estrogen is going to lead to sleep fragmentation. And this is why women in perimenopause and menopause often suffer from really crappy sleep, is because estrogen levels are lower. And this is obviously not something that women control. And this is where hormone replacement therapy become really important, right? As a potential solution for women who are struggling with sleep. You want to try to figure out, how do I protect my sleep, right? Because if we can protect our sleep, we position ourselves to mitigate, a lot of these risk factors. Today's conversation is sponsored by Whoop, where I work as the global head of human performance principal scientist. Lots of us set resolutions in January, but the best time from a psychological and physiological standpoint is actually in the spring, because our bodies are wired to respond to environmental cues. Variables like daylight increasing and temperatures getting warmer give us a natural uptick in energy, mood, and motivation, creating a very real opportunity to engage in more movement and a stronger routine. With summer nearly here, right now is the time to really get intentional and start training to hit your health goals. Tools like Whoop Coach, trends, and weekly plans will give you insight into what is working and what needs improvement. I'm always looking at my recovery and my heart rate variability trends, or HRV. They're amongst the clearest signals of how well I'm aligning my behaviors with my values. If you'd like to explore your data, visit join.whoop.com/science to try Whoop free for 1 month. That's join.whoop.com/science. I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor, Huel, and one of their products that has been game-changing for me. Most of you listening will know that the food we put in our bodies impacts how we perform. Our energy levels, ability to stay focused, to recover, all of it is dictated by our nutrition. But for many of us, we're short on time, and time is often one of the biggest barriers when it comes to eating well. For me, between my job and launching this podcast and my family, there are days when I feel like I only have minutes to grab something to eat. On those days, I have Huel Black Edition ready to drink. Firstly, because it's a balanced meal with 35 grams of protein and 27 essential vitamins and minerals, and it's low in sugar. Secondly, it tastes like a milkshake. And it's hardly surprising that Huel has sold over 500 million meals. If you've never tried Huel, take this opportunity and get 15% off by visiting my.huel.com/Kristen Holmes and use code Kristen. You'll get a free gift with your first purchase. Terms and conditions in the description. So, what causes sleep? So, there are two processes that determine when you're going to be awake and when you want to be asleep. It's circadian rhythms and sleep pressure, which is also known as process S. So, circadian rhythms, I've talked about on a previous episode, but again, these are kind of the 24, you have basically a 24-hour kind of master clock in your brain, and it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's getting inputs from the environment as to whether it is light outside or it's dark outside. When it is light outside, now this could be artificial light, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is going to communicate to all the cells in the body that it's time to be awake. Now, the problem is if this is during the night and you're sending the signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that is going to then tell all the cells in the body that's time to be awake. They don't actually want to be awake. So basically what is happening externally is in conflict with the preference of what should be happening internally, okay? And this tension is what we call misalignment or circadian misalignment, okay? So when we are engaging in behaviors outside of or in conflict with the natural light-dark cycle is going to cause a lot of internal conflict and tension. And this tension and conflict internally is really the basis for aging and disease, which is crazy to think about, right? So we want to try to align as best we can our behaviors with the natural light-dark cycle. Sleep pressure comes down to a chemical called adenosine. And we've probably heard this in the context of caffeine, so I'll unpack that a little bit. But basically, adenosine is being built up in the brain the moment you wake up and view light. And as this builds up, the sleepier you are going to get. So roughly 15 to 16 hours after the initiation of adenosine, you are going to start to feel sleepy. And what you've built up is this thing called sleep pressure. The best thing that you can do is allow this natural process to occur and come to learn your natural pressure for sleep. Now, if I were to have to take a guess on how many folks know their natural pressure for sleep, I would say it's probably less than 20% of the population. And I can say this because about 80% of the population is sleep deprived or not getting the sleep that they need or waking up saying that they don't feel refreshed. So I think there is a lot of opportunity for people to improve their health outcomes by literally just understanding when their natural pressure for sleep is. Just a little bit on men versus women. So I think it's pretty well established now, and we see this. I see this in our data. Again, millions and millions of sleep, hundreds of thousands of folks. There's no question that women need a little bit more sleep than men, to the tune of about 24 minutes. And definitely women who are have a natural menstrual cycle seem to need slightly more than that during the luteal phase. So you've got a woman who is menstruating has a follicular phase, which is basically menses and ovulation. And then luteal phase is the couple weeks leading into menses. And the luteal phase is typically a really effortful time for women. There's a lot happening. And as a result, our needs during that time are just a little bit different, okay? Men do not go through all of these processes and all these big hormonal fluctuations. As a result, that time period is just not as metabolically expensive. And that's really what it comes down to during this luteal phase, is that it's just metabolically a bit more expensive. So that means we just need to spend a little bit more time in bed in order to regenerate and restore and account for all the things that are happening in our brain and our body during that time. So it's nothing crazy, but just something to be mindful. Your sleep pressure might come a little bit sooner. I think there's some pretty good consensus in the sleep science space is that everyone needs a little bit different time in bed. And it is influenced a lot by how much you move during the day. What we see in the data, and we're talking millions and millions of sleep, is that more people who move during the day are getting more efficient sleep. It does not mean they need to spend more time in bed. All it means is that these folks who are exercising and moving a lot during the day and are classified as high fit are actually more efficient sleepers. They spend more time in deeper stages of sleep than people who are lower fit. If you are not as fit, you will likely have to spend a little bit more time in bed in order to have the quality of sleep that you need to feel restored tomorrow. So, how do we back into finding kind of this, what would be like your sleep sweet spot? So, you need to start kind of the moment you wake up. And really, finding your natural pressure for sleep is going to help with the number one predictor of all-cause mortality: sleep regularity. Okay, so oftentimes we can say, well, you could hear me say sleep consistency, sleep regularity really matters. And you'd be like, all right, I'm trying to go to bed at, 10 o'clock every single night. And I'm trying to wake up at, 6 a.m. every single morning, and I can't do it. My body clock just isn't aligned with that. Well, that's because you haven't created conditions that are going to allow you to feel sleepy at 10 p.m. And that might not actually be exactly your natural pressure for sleep. So it is worth the exercise of learning what your natural pressure for sleep is. Now, you want to set your alarm for a time that you can wake up consistently 7 days of the week for the most part. And you can give yourself a half-hour buffer on either side. So if you set your alarm for 7 a.m., okay, you can move. If you want to extend your sleep a little bit on the weekend, you can go to 7:30. Or if you have to wake up a little bit earlier to get to an earlier meeting, you can set it for 6:30. But you want to try to make that wake up time as consistent as possible, plus or minus 30 minutes on either end. And you want to try to do that as often as you can over the course of the month. Now, what that consistent wake up time is going to do is it's going to force you to view light at a consistent time. So you're gonna wake up at 7, you're gonna view natural light within 20 to 30 minutes of waking up. Artificial light works as well. If it's not light out yet, you want to just view as much artificial light as you can, again, to tell the system that it's time to wake up, to get the cortisol going, right? Cortisol is really important. It gets a bad rap, but that's what gets you up out of bed and gives you energy to engage in tasks and to get ready for work and all of that. So cortisol is really important. Um, and then throughout the day, you want to try to exercise. You want to try to see as much natural light as possible. And then once the sun starts to set, if you can, you want to get outside and watch the sunset. Get your eyes in the sky the best that you can. And this will actually make you less sensitive to blue rich light after the sun sets. Okay, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a buffer to deal with, this modern access to light 24/7. And then, best that you can, you want to minimize that artificial light exposure, especially the blue rich light. There are uh, light bulbs that are kind of circadian friendly that don't have any blue rich light in. I would recommend getting those and putting those in your home environment so you can move around safely and know that basically this kind of spectrum of light is going to tell your body that it's time to wind down. And that's really the signals that you're trying to tell your body at night, is that it's time to wind down. About 30 minutes or so prior to when you would like to sleep, you want to make sure that you're really not allowing yourself to view that blue rich light. So that means putting filters on your phones and really making sure there isn't any overhead lights. So you should start with this protocol. It might take a couple days, but you'll start to feel sleepy. And that is your natural pressure for sleep. And you want to succumb to that natural pressure for sleep. Now, the first couple days, if you're carrying a lot of sleep debt, that is, you haven't really been getting sufficient quality sleep, consistent sleep, you might fall asleep a little bit earlier. Um, but if you keep doing this protocol, that it's going to shake out where it might be, you might stay at that time or it might be a little bit later, but just pay attention and really focus on just succumbing to whenever that biggest pressure for sleep arrives. Just be ready to put your head on the pillow and close your eyes. The other thing that is very important to mention is that we want to avoid caffeine and naps after 1 p.m. during this, I think, experiment period where we're trying to really identify our sleep sweet spot. Caffeine up until 1 o'clock should be fine. It takes about 7 to 8 hours or so to get out of your system. So you just want to make sure it's like fully out of your system. The other thing is napping, which again, and caffeine and naps are going to basically block the adenosine, right, from being produced. Again, when you think about this experiment, it's in a if you feel really really sleepy and you need it to maintain safety, of course, take a nap, but just try to do it prior to 1 p.m. And basically, if you can kind of adopt these behaviors, you'll position yourself to know when your natural pressure for sleep is. Now, let's say your natural pressure for sleep comes around 9:30 and you've set your alarm for 7. Maybe you end up waking up naturally after a couple days at 6:15. If that happens and that feels good to you, that is, you feel alert during the day, you feel refreshed, restored, set your alarm at 6:15. Okay? So this is just a way to kind of experiment to figure out what is the perfect time in bed and the perfect bedtime for you, knowing that we're all going to be a little bit different. But this is how you get there. So when you adopt this protocol, just some things that you can expect. What you've done essentially is you've moved from a scenario where you were probably likely misaligned from a circadian rhythm perspective to circadian alignment. Okay, so by dialing in your morning light behavior and your evening light behavior, you're basically creating conditions of circadian alignment. And when you have circadian alignment, okay, what happens is you end up producing melatonin, right? So whatever for you, whatever your potential is in terms of, melatonin production, you're able to realize that potential. And that has not just, melatonin is not just about helping you initiate sleep, okay? And again, in order to release melatonin, you have to be in the presence of darkness, okay? It is called the hormone of darkness for a reason. It needs darkness in order to know to be released. Okay. Circulating melatonin is very, very important to help you fall asleep, but it has other protective benefits. It helps reduce the risk of cancer, okay, and certain types of cancer. And I talked about this in a previous episode in depth. So just touching on it again here, particularly breast cancer. Okay. So making sure that you're protecting your melatonin. Okay. And that backing into your sleep sweet spot is going to help protect your melatonin. The other really important benefit of melatonin production is that it decreases adiposity. Okay, so the fatness and the fat that you can accumulate in the middle area will be decreased, and this is largely due to the fact that melatonin helps make you more insulin sensitive. Okay, so you have better glycemic regulation. Okay, which reduces your risk of metabolic dysfunction. I think the other thing I think that I'll end on that uh, really impacts our ability to fall asleep and stay asleep at night um, is how we manage stress throughout the day. Stress is so important to kind of stay ahead of and manage proactively throughout the day, so it does not rear its head at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. Okay, which is a typical kind of wake up time for folks, right? And what there's a couple reasons for that, like kind of 1 a.m. wake up time. It could be a late meal potentially. It can be a lot of rich light in the lead up to bed could end up rearing its head. Alcohol consumption, which may make you pass out and fall asleep, but then all of a sudden you wake up in the middle of the night. Um, and then the other big one is kind of a lot of worrying during the day and then the lead up to bed. So a couple strategies to mitigate some of that stress, that negative stress accumulation across the day, because not all stress is bad. To be very, very clear, when we view the stress as threatening, that has a bigger chance of disrupting our sleep at night versus if we viewed that stress as challenging. And when we're in this threatening state, we have higher blood pressure, we have higher heart rate, we have lower heart rate variability. And it seems in our data that the threat and challenge physiologically look exactly the same, but my perception actually influences whether or not that stress is kind of good or bad, in that we see it basically manifest either positively, negatively during sleep. So if the stress was a challenging stress, physiologically I look exactly the same. But the only difference between threat and challenge is how I sleep. So it's absolutely worth, I think, your effort in just evaluating, how stress shows up for you, and if it feels threatening or if it feels challenging, because we know now that this is directly going to influence our sleep at night. So that's stress, which is different from worry. Okay. Worry is something that is, it's basically this chronic, right? Like I'm constantly worrying about something. And one of the really effective technique that has been shown and is used in all sorts of different types of therapy is this practice of scheduling your worry, and this has been shown to really help people fall asleep and stay asleep. So folks who are really anxious and worried, just by journaling your worries, okay, writing your worries down, getting them on paper, getting them out is super cathartic and actually has been shown to help people fall asleep and stay asleep. So that's another technique. Just journaling I think is really powerful in general, in terms of just making sense of your emotions and your feelings and your worries and your anxieties. And so writing it down isn't going to make it worse. It in fact makes it better. So that is a really easy technique. It's free to all of us. That actually might help you sleep better at night. The other technique that can be really powerful is just our how we breathe. So we know that breathing through our nose versus our mouth is really what we're supposed to be doing as humans. The only reason really to have our mouth open is if we're eating or talking or kissing. Other than that, your mouth should generally be closed. So if you're having a hard time staying asleep, it could actually be your breathing mechanics. We want to generally, kind of breathe from our belly. So diaphragmatic breathing is kind of good, and you can practice this. There's lots of different modalities. Just if you diaphragmatic breathing, type that in, you'll see lots of ways to train how to breathe properly. But getting your breathing mechanics on track also is going to help bring a more restorative night's sleep. So something else to just look out for. I know this is a lot of information, but I think what I really want folks to take away from this conversation is finding your natural pressure for sleep. Now, in this episode, I didn't talk about jet lag, and most of us have jet lag, even though we're not traveling out of our own time zone, right? Jet lag is just basically symptoms of brain fog and just dysregulated sleep-wake time and basically circadian rhythm disruption. A lot of us face that in our own time zone, and that's called actually social jet lag, which I'll cover in a different episode. The other thing that I didn't really cover is shift work, and again, that deserves its own dedicated episode, which we'll do at some point. So in the very near future. The third is new parents. And I will go really deep on that at some point in the near future as well. So this is generally an episode for kind of teenagers, just healthy adults who don't have sleep and circadian disorders and are looking to figure out how to find their sleep sweet spot so they can engage in the world in a way that feels really good.
I've discovered a game-changing beauty device, and I'm not gatekeeping. It's the red light face mask from this show's partner, Bone Charge. For those who are new to red light therapy or near infrared, it works by penetrating deep into the skin to boost collagen production, reduce inflammation, and smooth fine lines, wrinkles, and scars. I've only used it for a few weeks, but I'm already seeing improved texture and a bit more firmness. These are, just kind of preliminary data, but so far, so good. And what makes it stand out for me is that it's cordless. I can literally make pancakes for my kids while wearing the mask. What's also unique about Bone Charge that I love is that it has more LEDs than any other brands, offering better coverage and optimized treatments. Check out Bone Charge's face mask or explore the rest of their amazing products to aid your health and wellness journey. Head to bondcharge.com/Kristen, and for a sneaky 15% off code, use Kristen at checkout. Discount applies site-wide. You'll also get free shipping and a 1-year warranty. Head to bondcharge.com/Kristen now.